collaborative is in our name. I think by virtue of that, it's sort of self-evident that we try to sort of steer more coordinated action or aligned action within the Indian climate ecosystem. We're a collaborative of many foundations and philanthropies. So we deal primarily with grant funding. What we try to do is move grant capital towards climate solutions within the Indian climate ecosystem. Earth Exponential is really a platform that we're building out at the India Climate Collaborative. It's genuinely a first for India. It's also an India first lens on what climate solutions, look like, what they should be. So Earth Exponential is a platform that we're building out at the India Climate Collaborative. It looks to templatize, climate solutions across the country. What are your ideal or best-in-class set of solutions, both from the perspective of scale, impact, measurement. I know that funders really struggle to understand what climate solutions look like, what they should be funding in this space. At the same time, civil society organizations can't access these funds. They don't know how to speak the language of funders. They don't know how to use that money to necessarily build better capacities within their own organizations. We're hoping that a platform like this will not only play a coordinating mechanism between being able to direct funding to the projects that need them the most on the ground, but at the same time, we're hoping that this funding plays a really critical role in helping civil society organizations build their capacity so that they can scale climate solutions at the rate and at the speed and at the urgency that we require today. So Earth Exponential is a first of its kind platform. It is an India first platform, but we've named it Earth Exponential because we hope it'll have exponential impact, but also because we don't want to restrict it to India as a geography. We're hoping that this is a global platform, one that will allow funding to flow in towards climate solutions, but also can hopefully start including global solutions over time. What that means is nonprofits on the ground who are working on climate solutions, whether it's research institutions or policy think tanks or grassroots organizations and implementers. One of the biggest impediments that they face in solving for climate is being able to access more funding, to be able to scale their solutions, to be able to build more capacity to do the work that they are doing. And so the hope is that if we can direct more grant funding their way, we can solve for that problem. We can use funding as a lever to be able to drive more climate solutions in the country, and in that way hopefully build more capacity for nonprofits.
The idea of this platform really is to help bridge some of the gaps between the funding ecosystem and the solution provider ecosystem as far as climate solutions go. We kind of came to this platform after a lot of research and understanding of the sector. So we spoke to about 40 funders, CSR funders specifically, to try and understand what were the gaps in the ecosystem. They kind of summarized as 4 broad areas. The first area was they didn't feel like there were enough climate change solutions out there to fund, or they didn't really know how to go about that. 2 is when it did come to climate change, the concept notes that they were receiving were quite technical in nature, and so they had a hard time to sparse through these. The third was that there's a little bit of mistrust as far as kind of nonprofits go, and so there was a tendency for these climate change funders to kind of go towards the nonprofits that they had existing relationships with. And the fourth was there seemed to be kind of a lack of exchange of ideas between these funders. And so we said, can we plug these 4 gaps and try and also address the concerns that funders have from a regulatory standpoint? There's a lot of compliance that is required of them when it comes to CSR funding. How can we kind of provide a means to address these 4 issues? At the same time, on the solution side, when we talked to nonprofits, we started developing an understanding of what some of the capacity gaps were on their end, right? So for example, being able to address the funders, access the funders in a right way, being able to vocalize what climate change impacts were and measure them, right? The actual ability to understand how to measure climate change. It's a complex issue. And so we said, let's try and meet these 2 parties where they are, kind of our core community members, and do it in a way where we're constantly listening, learning, iterating. As we know, funding into climate change is quite sparse. So to just give you an example from the CSR perspective, of the 67,000 crore rupees dedicated to CSR spending, only about 6,000 crore rupees go to environmental issues. And climate change is not actually even accounted for in official sense, because specifically the goal of mitigating the emissions as far as greenhouse gases goes and combating the effects of climate change from a resilience perspective is not actually measured, right? So we don't really know how much is going to climate change. So we know that there's a huge potential. We have seen organizations and nonprofits struggle with core operational functionalities. Are there other organizations or partners that we can work with who are really entrenched already in the development ecosystem and have an understanding of what are some of the issues that nonprofits face, and can we work with them to enable those conversations? So I'm very excited to say that as we were developing Earth Exponential, we wanted to make sure that we were meeting funders through the process and kind of educating them as we're going through this process, right? So even before we launched the platform, we took some of the projects that we are featuring to funders to try and understand whether it was even interesting for them. We're really excited to share that we've actually made one match. And so Make My Trip Foundation has come in to support a project by Vikas, a nonprofit working to build a bioshield, a mangrove bioshield in the coastal areas of Bharuch in Gujarat. What they're essentially doing is not only creating a bioshield that will help protect against soil erosion in the region, but will provide incomes for farmers and fisher folk in that area by producing certain kinds of trees that enable fish to come to the area, also grow certain fruits and vegetables that the farmers can then sell for additional income. So we're very thrilled about this match. It's going to be a match that actually enables 65 hectares of forests to be produced. And so huge kudos to both the Vikas and the Make My Trip Foundation team.
I set up this organization in 78. My first engagement was with the South Gujarat, one of the most economically and ecologically backward taluka called Jambusar. And I discovered that there is a prevalence of bonded laborers, about 3,000 families who were bonded, belonging to scheduled tribe. We found out that there is a strong linkage between degradation of natural resources along the coast and the poverty. And we thought if we can reverse this process through organizing the poor and through them try and revitalize those resources, we will be addressing twin issue of poverty and natural resource regeneration. Finally, government agreed to do a program called REMAG, Regeneration of Mangroves, with the funding from India-Canada Environment Facility. And I sort of was the one who was mover behind the whole exercise. And then we gradually sort of expanded this work and convinced one industry that will give us a pilot project for about a kilometer where we can have mangroves as a one layer, and then we have subsequent layers for other biodiversity, other plantation and fodder towards the village side, which was successful between 2016 and 2019. And based on that success, we approached Climate Change Department, Government of Gujarat, and I said, can we expand this idea of creating a green wall? And that's how the whole 15-kilometer long coastal belt was covered in Jambusar Taluka. So we now have a green wall having mangroves on seaside, fodder and other multi-layer plantation on the other village side. It has ecological, environmental, and economic benefits that one can draw out of it. You are creating a special economic zone in terms of special environmental zone instead of economic zone. And that environmental zone is basically providing environmental benefits in terms of erosion, reduction in erosion, salinity, protection against tsunami or cyclones, absorption of carbon dioxide, providing 80% resources for labor, for the wage labor, for the communities who are immediate advantage. Then fodder and fish will be sort of get some fillip out of these activities. And the protection of agricultural land behind these plantation for salinity, against salinity. So what we have been planning to do is to set up women owned or run bioshield committees in each of these villages, help them plan the micro plan, develop the micro plans, train them in the entire mechanism of really planting trees. I mean, nursery preparation to plantation and maintenance. And after 3 years of plantation work, we also would like to look at post-plantation livelihood for these communities so that they protect and live out of these green assets that we are creating.
One thing I want to emphasize is that climate and development are not a binary. They are, in fact, one and the same. Climate is very much a lens we apply to the development sector and development priorities. It's something that actually coexists with development. You can't work on development issues, whether it's poverty or agriculture or livelihood generation, without actually applying a climate lens, because climate is exacerbating those development sector issues.
So the first example I can give you about an organization that's featured on the platform Earth Exponential is an organization called Srijan. So Srijan has a model where they've worked with self-help groups of women, tribal women in hard-to-reach parts of Rajasthan. They're working with them to kind of help integrate value chain systems within their existing society. So the idea is not to pull these women out of where they are, it's to meet them where they are, right? So tribal women of the Garassia tribe typically do rely on non-timber forest produce, whether it's sitafal, ber, palash leaves, and they kind of sell those in informal economies, often for exponentially low prices or really exploitative prices. The goal that Srijan had was to create this self-help group and actually build an organization called the Ghumar Mahila Cooperative. This group adds value to these non-timber forest produce through solar energy. So, for example, they have purchased or worked with the women to purchase sewing machines, cold storage units. All of these things run on solar energy. So the second example I'll give you is of an organization called SESTA. SESTA works in central Assam in an area called Karbi Anglong. Excuse me if I've butchered the pronunciation. The organization is actually hoping to achieve 3 different things by working predominantly with small-scale farmers and farmers who are women. They kind of create self-help groups. They actually enable these women in these self-help groups and have partnered quite closely with the government in that region to create nurseries. These nurseries protect saplings that they actually grow, and these saplings are of typically cash crops like areca nut. So they use these saplings to then provide longer-term sustainability to farmers in that region.
Climate philanthropy is not enough. It's nowhere close to being enough. Is it more than it was in India? 100%. So we've already seen, I think based on the latest Hurun report on philanthropy, which came out in 2022, they've indicated there is a 46% increase in funding towards projects or initiatives, on climate and environment. That's a really welcome sign. I don't think we're at the point that we can say climate is a lens that is being applied everywhere, not yet. It needs to be. So what that means for us at the India Climate Collaborative is that we very much try to ensure that this binary between climate and development no longer exists. That when you're looking towards philanthropic projects or funding or grant making in this space, you're accounting for climate impacts. I don't know if just transitions is even the right word, not for this part of the world. For emerging economies, maybe there's a new narrative that we need to build. I definitely think that when it comes to the principles of equity and justice, there is no type of capital, other than philanthropy that is best suited to bring those principles forward or to be responsive to those principles. And I think that's really the role that philanthropy plays.